right. And hello and welcome, everyone. Let's get things rolling. My name is Katie McNeila, Associate Director of Corporate Marketing here at Spinutech, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. For more than 2 decades, Spinutech has been an independent, full-service digital marketing agency providing strategic partnerships to clients nationwide. We have offices in Cedar Falls and Des Moines, Iowa, Tampa, Florida, plus key talent hubs like Chicago, and more than 100 remote team members across the country. We're joined today by Captain Compliance, a data privacy platform that helps organizations navigate regulations, build trust, and streamline compliance with automated tools. We brought together an incredible panel of experts to share their perspectives, so allow me to introduce our presenters. Today, we're joined by Alex Proctor, Chief Trust and Compliance Officer for Captain Compliance, and Pat and Kip are Directors of Business Insights at Spinutech. Today, the team's going to be talking about what's behind so many of our today's biggest data privacy lawsuits and privacy-first platforms and browsers and where they're headed, and how to audit and adapt our own tracking, consent, and targeting strategies. One housekeeping note before we go ahead and get started. The chat today has been disabled for today's event, but you can submit questions at any time using our Q&A feature. The team will review everything that comes in and follow up one-on-one after the presentation to ensure your questions get the attention they deserve. And with that, I will turn it over to Kip to kick things off.
All right. Thanks, Katie. We're going to dive in here. Ad dollars at risk, why privacy compliance is now a performance strategy. So I think we can jump to the next slide. Excited to see everybody, and I think share a lot of good information from the team here. And the big issue is the privacy shift is here. And what does that really mean for everybody on the call? Well, privacy is no longer just a legal or IT issue, right? We're not just slapping a privacy document on the website anymore. It's really impacting marketing performance. And it's a challenge to us agencies and businesses in 2025. How do we navigate these changes? How do we help find strategies that really win as we're getting less and less data from our customer over time? So a couple things here on this slide, I think to call out, 88% of users, 88% of iOS users worldwide chose not to allow apps to track them, right? And in the United States, it's even worse. So we're not getting information from a lot of our apps. The signals aren't playing nice in the sandbox. And iOS 14 was a big, I think, turning point for all of us. And we're going to dive into a couple things here. So one, what are the laws of the land? How are they changing and what to see in the future? What are some winning strategies we can use in 2025 and beyond? And Pat's going to jump into like the do's and don'ts of what you can do in terms of data collection. So how do we get here? 72% of US consumers call for stronger government regulation on company data policies. And why are they doing that? Well, this real fun chart on the right here shows a lot of data breaches, right? From Cambridge Analytica to the most recent Snowflake data breach. A lot of things are happening and consumers are upset about it. They want to protect their data. They want to have options and they're asking for regulation. Part of this is the internet and social media are really 10 to 12 years old. So that's just as things are maturing, we have to put regulation in place to protect us over time. So I'm not going to dive into all of these. I'm going to pass this to Alex. Alex is going to talk about some of the historical legacy lawsuits that really have set the framework for the things that we're going to see moving forward and talk about some upcoming law changes. So I'll pass it to Alex.
Awesome. Kip, I loved that timeline you made. You had some great stuff on there. I just wanted to emphasize a couple of the more recent elements of that timeline. So it makes sense to start by talking about wiretapping lawsuits. We have been seeing an absolute surge in these wiretapping lawsuits since approximately 2022. And the interesting thing about them is that these lawsuits are not relying on today's modern privacy laws, which are passing at a rapid pace. So I'll be talking about those in a minute, but these aren't relying on them. These lawsuits are being based on literally decades old wiretapping statutes. And these very old statutes are being applied to the use of modern web technology. So think things like pixels and your chatbots and your analytics software. So if you're anything like me, it may seem odd to you. Like, why are these 60-year-old laws being used to challenge modern website practices? And I have a pretty easy answer. And that answer is that the new privacy laws tend not to give individuals a private right of action, so they can't sue. In contrast, these old wiretapping laws do. And the courts have shown at least some willingness to be able to apply them to website tracking. So what's happened is in the last couple of years, these very old laws are now this powerful tool for litigators who are looking to fill the enforcement gaps that's left with the modern privacy laws. So on the right-hand side, I've got the California Invasion of Privacy Act. And what you need to know is there are more than one wiretapping law out there. There's different ones around the country, but if there's one you need to know about, this is the one. So SEPA, which is the acronym here, is from the 60s. And when I tell you that it was originally aimed at wiretapping, I'm literally talking about wiretapping phone lines. But just like the others, this law is being used against website technologies more than any other law right now. So the key thing about SEPA is that if your company is using things like session replay tools, the chatbots, or analytics programs, particularly those that involve third parties, what can happen is you can face allegations of unauthorized interception under this law. The penalties can be pretty high. They tend to be $5,000 for each infraction, but the thing to know is that the infractions can stack up. So an infraction is per user or per interaction with your website. So as you can imagine, the penalties can accumulate rapidly. And then the last thing I want to say about the wiretapping lawsuits is it's just muddy waters right now. The courts don't handle the SEPA cases uniformly. Some are applying the statutes sort of narrowly and are throwing away claims, where other courts are ruling in favor of the plaintiffs. And there's been enough success with these lawsuits to where they should justify serious concern from companies. I also want to talk just a little bit about the state laws. So I've got another slide here. That was another point on your timeline there, Kip. Just in the last couple of years, we have seen 20 states pass comprehensive privacy laws. Every single one of them is a little bit different from the next, but they all have a couple of key themes that tend to run through them. So the first theme is that companies need to be transparent about their data handling. So this means that if you're collecting personal data, which who isn't, you need to be clearly disclosing what types of personal data you're collecting and how it's being used. The second point is purpose limitation. So you can only collect personal data for legitimate business reasons and not more than you need. The third theme is risk assessments. This generally means evaluating your privacy practices and being able to quantify and justify why you're collecting and processing certain types of personal information. And the fourth one is a big one. It's consumer rights. So every state law contains some version of consumer privacy rights, even though they differ from one state to the next. So organizations are in a position where they have to respect consumers who wish to exercise their rights. And there's big penalties for organizations that can't do that. Finally, we have two more themes worth noting. The privacy laws tend to require special protections for minors. This usually refers to children under the age of 13. A common requirement here is that you need to obtain clear opt-in consent if you're dealing with children's data, or really any other sort of sensitive personal data. And then the final theme is non-discrimination. So this is actually referring to the concept that businesses can't penalize users or degrade their experiences just because they chose to exercise their privacy rights. So yeah, that's I wanted to share a little bit more about those 2 points in the timeline. We can keep moving here.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. So Alex talked a bit about how the legal landscape has been evolving over the past couple of years. Kip gave us a pretty good insight into the entire timeline, as well as just some stats about how consumers are really starting to think more and more about this. So what does all this mean for a digital marketer's plan? The issues that we're facing can be bucketed into three separate challenges. We're looking at consumer awareness of what's going on, the legal implications behind all this, and technical roadblocks. And we're going to dive into each of these in more detail, but for now, just quick high-level preview. On the consumer side, as they're becoming more aware of what data is being collected and how it's being used, consumers has become more and more concerned and are beginning to take more measures to protect their online identities. Legally, the legal landscape is also starting to catch up in this regard as well. As Kip and Alex both mentioned, the last few years, we've seen more bills being signed into laws protecting consumers and how they browse online, meaning that advertisers need to be more familiar with what these laws are in order to remain compliant and above board from a legal standpoint across the whole country and across different states and how states are protecting people. And lastly, browsers and digital tools themselves are also are starting to implement more consumer protection functions, meaning that advertisers sometimes have fewer ways to analyze data than they were able to in the past, and are just having a little harder time coming up with plans that target people in the way that they used to. So let's take a step back and also just take a look at how this data is being collected. So there are two primary methods for collecting data online: pixel tracking and server-side tracking. And so if anybody on the call is familiar with the tracking aspect of the digital landscape, you've probably heard of pixel tracking. Up until recent years and all these developments, it's probably been the more common method for tracking behaviors. Basically, you have a one-by-one pixel that's placed on pages of a website, and whenever a user loads a page with a pixel on it, information about the user's visit is collected via that pixel and is sent back to tracking platforms. Pixel information can also be tied to a user's cookie information to get a broader understanding of that person's online data. And for cookies, we're going to have a little bit more on that later, but basically cookies are text files that are stored on your device and they gather information about your wider browsing behavior, so not just specific to a particular site. And on the other hand, server-side tracking, this is becoming more popular in recent years. Again, if you're familiar with the discussion that was had for a while about cookies being deprecated, then you know that server-side solutions have become more popular kind of as a result of that whole saga. And to be clear, for those not in the know, cookie deprecation is no longer a thing. But some of the benefits of moving away from that strategy that a lot of people started to adopt, like server-side tracking, are still with us and are considered best practices these days. So server-side tracking does not rely on pixels or cookies. Rather, it works by the website server itself collecting data on user behavior and then sending that data to the tracking platforms. And this can be further supplemented again by first-party data like CRM data to make that more robust. So again, this doesn't rely on pixels and cookies, but the user basically ends up consenting to the data collection just as the terms are laid out and outlined on a site's privacy policy. So the data is generally regarded as being more private, more accurate, and having more control. So now that we know how the data gets collected, let's just take a look at what data is collected. These are the types of data that are being collected as outlined by two of the largest players in the space, so Google and Meta, aka Facebook, Instagram. Google's privacy policy states that it collects data such as a user's search queries, videos that have been watched, voice and audio information, ad and content interactions, activity on third-party sites that are using Google services. And Meta states that it collects data on, for example, content that a user creates, content that is provided through camera and voice features, messages that you send through the platforms, interactions with the AI tools, apps you use, photos you provide. Long story short, it's quite a list for both companies, and obviously there's so pervasive across the entire digital ecosystem that they're getting a lot of data from a lot of different places. And so as users have gotten more familiar with what's being collected about them online and just become a little bit more savvy about that, they're becoming more and more wary and more defensive about how these platforms are monitoring them. So again, just as the entire space is evolving, the platforms are also starting to implement some features that are becoming a little bit more consumer friendly too. And so some of these platforms are also rolling out some restrictions for how you can advertise and how people can be reached, and just limiting some things that are being collected as well as what can be targeted. And so we can talk about that as well. So ad platforms will call out several areas that advertisers cannot under any circumstance target, and violating these guidelines or circumventing them in any ways can get your account banned. So for example, things like religious beliefs, race, ethnicity, political affiliation, sexual orientation, these are outlined as things that cannot be used in advertising campaigns just because they're deemed as being too personal or too identifying. More recently, there are even whole categories that have become a little bit more restricted. You can still advertise within those spaces, but they do have some limitations to them. So for example, housing is one that's come up within the last 5 years or so, where you can't layer on even simple demographic information, such as gender or zip codes, because that starts to get into things like the Fair Housing Act and discrimination that can occur there, and the laws that are in place to protect that. So the ad platforms too are starting to respond to some of the privacy concerns here and the privacy laws that are coming up. But that hasn't stopped users from taking things into their own hands. A lot of this stuff has led to the rise of privacy-focused browsers and search engines that are becoming more popular recently. So the two examples that we have here, DuckDuckGo and Brave, they put privacy really at the forefront of their offerings. They pledge to protect user privacy, and they do this by actively blocking trackers by default. So it's no surprise that these products have become more popular, just with even some of the stats that Kip had mentioned right at the start about people being more conscious about this. Other stats that supports this show that 85% of users globally want tighter reins on how their data is being collected. And just over half of young adults have actively taken steps to protect their online history. So there's been a lot of information now, what can be tracked, what can't be tracked, restrictions that are in place. So what does all this mean for digital marketing? Users are taking some of these elements into their own hands. Ad platforms are starting to put more consumer-friendly targeting restrictions in place. More and more laws are starting to get put into place. So how do digital marketers move forward in this landscape?
Great information, Alex and Pat. And just jumping in here, yeah. So what does this mean for us as marketers? And I think we're all feeling this right now, right? We're navigating these changes. So a couple key issues and areas to highlight, and I think this graphic does a good idea, good visual of showing where the breaks in the chain are. Is really targeting, right? You're shrinking audience pools due to in-app and opt-out. So you're getting, right, Meta's degrading a lot of interest-based targeting and going broader because they can't get all that information, and they're relying on AI and machine learning where other things in targeting parameters used to help us, right? Retargeting, as Pat said, reduced ability to re-engage site visitors. You're just getting less information if people aren't opting in or they've opted out of iOS 14. You're just not getting the data. So you're getting less quality audiences to remarket. And then attribution, right? Incomplete data leads to skewed ROI measurement, right? So essentially, we're not seeing if people are converting or the channels are really modeling things for that. So we're sort of going back in time to a degree in terms of marketing and our strategies moving forward. So I think we can get a little bit deeper into these three areas before we talk about the playbook moving forward. So what happens? What is the impact of these opt-outs? So again, targeting, you're getting shrinking audience pools. You're not getting as much in-platform data based on interest and pages and things that people like, as we're not collecting that data. You get that loss of precision, right? Without device IDs, cookies, or consent. You're just getting less first-party data to build those audiences off of. And when you do add targeting parameters to your campaigns, you're paying a premium for it, right? You're paying higher CPMs as you restrict audiences. Meta and Google are making you pay for it. Retargeting, right? Pat talked about cookie-based. You have shorter retargeting windows, right? Safari and Firefox, just limiting how long things can be stored. And then the real fun part is a lot of the apps aren't playing nice in the sandbox anymore, right? We're not sharing data across apps, so you can't really connect that user journey as well as we used to. So how does that impact attribution? You're probably feeling it, right? Your Meta's not looking good, your Google's looking worse, and your piggy bank is saying we need to fix something, right? So at the end of the day, your attribution isn't working right. You're underperforming the ROI. So we need to shift the way we're thinking. And really, that winning strategy moving forward is going to be a couple things, and we'll dive into it in the next few slides here. Is investing in that first party data. How do you collect a compliant first party data? How do you build consent driven audience building? And then you want a privacy compliant measurement models, right? Think MMM or think more traditional ways of measuring things like measuring CAC to profit. So we'll dive into it in the next few slides. One takeaway from this as we jump into the winning playbook is, the best performance strategy now starts with compliance. No longer is marketing and compliance different. The strategies have to work together, knowing that we have all these limitations. So the biggest thing we can give you guys as a takeaway is to start now from these four core areas that we're going to talk about. I'm going to pass it to Pat.
Yeah, so now that we have covered some of the hows and the whys and the whats around privacy and compliance, we're going to get into how marketers and media leaders can adapt their strategies to stay on top of all this. And we've broken this down into 4 pillars that we're going to get into. In order for leaders to be successful in this environment, you need to audit your tracking and your consent flows and make sure that everything is in good shape there. Getting alignment across all of your teams to ensure that everything is above board. So not just your media teams or your IT teams reviewing your platforms, but also looping in legal teams to help review privacy policies for whatever platforms you're going to be using. Implementing server-side and pixel governance strategies. And then finally, with everything in place, testing privacy resilient targeting to make sure that you're reaching the right people without casting too broad of a net. So to get into some of those details, I can let Alex kick us off.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm just going to share a few ways that businesses can reduce their privacy risk, and cookie consent management is right up there at the top. So, like Pat mentioned a few moments ago, cookies are nothing more than just small text files. They get stored on a user's device when they visit your website, and they can store personal data, they can track behavior, and of course, they power things like advertising and analytics and session tracking. So, because of this, the cookies do carry real privacy implications. In the United States, the general implication of the modern state privacy laws is that you're allowed to use this sort of stuff up front. You can run your cookies and trackers, but only if you do two things. The first is that you give good, clear, upfront notice about what you're doing. And then the other is that you offer users a meaningful way to opt out of non essential forms of tracking. So that was a little bit of a summary. Keep in mind there's some things to consider with litigation risk in there too, but that's the general idea. So cookie consent technologies are a very practical way to achieve this because you can automate the notice and the opt out process. You can track user preferences and generally stay in line with these legal requirements. The thing to know is that there's lots of little details to get right when it comes to consent. So not only do the banners need to function, and what I mean by that is apply good default policies and block the things that they say they're blocking, which I hate to say happens a lot less than you'd like to hope. But there's even very specific requirements around what they look like. So this is just one example of how specific the requirements can get, but it's a little bit of a fun one, so I wanted to share it. If you look at the right-hand side there, you've got a couple hypothetical cookie banners that I made up. And I'm here to tell you that only one of these is going to be acceptable to a regulator. And any consent obtained from the other three could be deemed invalid because they would be considered deceptive banners. So you may have already been looking at these. Just think to yourself, which one of these is acceptable? And there's only one right answer, and it is the one on the bottom. So the first one's not acceptable because it uses an enticing green color to try to get you to click on the allow button. It's nudging users to make that choice. Uh, the second one doesn't give a clear deny option. You know, it might be available under the settings button, but it's not an equal choice. It's not an equal path to accepting and rejecting, so that doesn't fly. The third one tries too hard to persuade. It's got language like unlock our site's full potential or like dramatically limit your access. So this is trying to coax users into accepting cookies. That doesn't work either. So the final banner is the only one that would be acceptable to a regulator with its equally styled buttons and neutral language. So that's just an example of the standard we should be aiming for, and it's just one of many examples I could share of just how specific the requirements here are and how important it is to get right. Let's talk about privacy notices too. If we can go to the next one. If there's one thing that you focus on after today, based on everything that I've shared, you might want it to be your privacy notice. And again, this is one that can be easier said than done. So one common problem with these notices is just that they can be there. It's easy for them to be inaccurate. So if your notice says one thing, but your actual business practices are a little bit different and they don't match, that can land you in hot water. That's the kind of thing that the FTC regularly targets under its authority to address unfair or deceptive trade practices. So the long and short of it is that your notice needs to be accessible, clear, and meaningful. So you want it written in plain language, no confusing fine print. It needs to be a full and accurate disclosure of your personal data handling. And just doing that, keeping it up to date with your operations is one of the most fundamental things that you can do to reduce risk. The other point on this is data subject requests. I've got that on the right-hand side. In addition to describing the data subject rights that's available to citizens, you need to be prepared to respect them when somebody makes a request. So the key to success here is structure. You should have processes in place to intake requests, process them, maybe even automate them, and ultimately respond back to the data subject. It can be a bit of a tight clock because in the United States, you typically only get 45 days to finish these out before you can be penalized. So the more structure you bring to the process, the better.
Awesome. And those are a great point, Alex. And I think that really sets up pillar two, which is you need your legal, your IT, and your marketing teams to really be aligned moving forward. So you want to develop that compliance playbook at the end of the day so that your organization or your business is really protected moving forward and that you have a team and a process to kind of watch each other's backs moving forward. So this is just a high level example of a good idea for that playbook, right? Having sort of an all team review where you guys align on what needs to happen, action items, and that you are aligning legal, IT, and marketing on all things moving forward. And then when you're implementing CAPI and pixels, that you're using that company governance to make sure that you're tracking the right data or excluding the right data. A couple things that we boxed in red is just right minimizing what you collect, only piping data back that's essential for conversions, right? You don't need to collect everything like you used to, just the essentials moving forward and making sure your teams are aligned. If you have a post-campaign launch strategy, making sure things like creative aren't saying things that can get you in trouble, that you're consistently looking at campaign performance and other things, that you're not running audiences that can get you into trouble. And then ongoing, right? Are you meeting, depending on the company, on a regular basis, whether it's quarterly or monthly, depending on the company, to make sure that your teams are accurate? If anything changes in the legal landscape, that you're updating policies and ad formats and campaigns across the board. And then lastly, it's important, if you can, involve channel reps where necessary to double check things or run or bounce ideas off of. Pillar 3 here. So I'm going to move because we do have about 5 minutes left. Server-side measurement strategies. Pat did a really good job of explaining what server-side tracking is. And I'm going to start at number 2 here. It's just making sure all the big channels have a server-side, you have the website pixels, right? That chain is broken, that you're implementing server-side tracking. So things like Meta's CAPI or Google's enhanced conversions are the most well-known ones, that you're implementing those and having simple naming conventions, very uniformed across channels, that you clean and audit your website. A lot of times we'll work with clients and they have 3 or 4 old pixels on there, right? They're clean, their events are, there's numerous events that they're not even using anymore. So how can you clean, remove, and simplify so you have a very unified, very simple structure to your measurement on your site? And that you develop that modern tech stack that protects you with all the things that Alex are talking about. So having that consent management platform, your CPM, like OneTrust, your tag managers, CAPI set up, and then tools like NinjaCat for analytics and MMM as you have to measure in this new world. But going back to server side, making sure you have your number 1 here, your server side tag gateway. If you look underneath the copy over here, it gives you a checkpoint for how things fire, and you want to make sure you have them in this order so that you're you're watching your back and protecting your company the best it can. So when the browser loads, it shows your site, right? Your CPM records consent. Your tag manager loads only what's allowed based on those choices. Your server gateway is really your last line of defense and enforces policies against and keeps an audit trail for you, audit trail. And then platforms like CAPI really only send the right data back to the platforms. And then targeting strategies that work in 2025 is you have to start thinking about in-platform is still really good. So having a percentage of your budget building warm audiences, right? A video views campaign or an in-app lead form campaign or a website click campaign to develop in-app signals where that quality data is still there, to build remarketing audiences and also build audiences that know, like, and trust you, so that when you do show them a lead form or something else, that you've already pre-qualified them and warned them up. Understanding the restricted audiences that Pat mentioned and how to navigate around them. Email list growth, so you build that first party data so you can do better things, and then having that robust organic social and site content that when people are landing on videos or watching videos in channel or landing on your website, you can remarket them where possible. And then now creative, we'll talk about this more on the next slide. Creative really works the hardest and actually is better targeting than almost the platform if you really understand how the channels have changed to get ahead of all of this privacy changes and the way that the channels work now, right? So we say creative does the best targeting because ultimately like I'll give Meta as an example, they're going to scrape the copy, they're going to scrape your website, they're going to read the video description, and they're going to be like, okay, this client is trying to target a 40-year-old runner to target with a shoe, right? So you want to do certain things like call out that target, your most profitable cohort. So are you a runner over 40 looking for a shoe? You want to do things like that so Meta can use its AI, understand what the consumers are looking at, right? They're watching or clicking on other shoe ads. It's going to put that ad in front of them. And each of your pieces of creative essentially create a lookalike audience. So your ad's going to do a lot of the targeting, right? As Google goes to AI Max and Meta's relying on broader audiences, the AI and machine learning is really looking to the creative to do the targeting for you. So you want to be very specific. This is a little strategy we have called the 4P creative cohort system. So you develop basically personas or cohorts, your most profitable cohorts, and you have 4 or 5 ads that basically target them, and you come in with different hooks to qualify that audience. And the more you do this, the more you'll do better in terms of performance across channels. And then we're running close on time here, but we wanted to walk you through a case study that really talks about marketing in this modern era. And a couple things that we did here. This is for a senior living client. They really needed to drive local awareness and local leads to fill their senior living facilities. And how we did that was just understanding the audiences that we targeting that we couldn't do, and understanding like creative. And nowadays we kind of did a reverse funnel in our social platforms. where we used, it's a housing category if you're just doing straight conversion ads. So we used educational content at the top of the funnel. So we were able to apply certain things to target their cohort. We did the 4 Ps in terms of the way we did creative, and then we had compliant in-app and website forms, and that helped us drive a record amount of leads for this client, and really qualify that audience at the upper funnel, right, through video views and traffic campaigns, and then pull them through. So when we're remarketing and asking for more direct leads under the special ad category, we had already qualified a lot of the audience to the upper mid funnel targeting. And I'm gonna pass it to Pat. Pat, I think you have a little bit more to talk about on this case study, but this just shows you that using the information that you have, you can create craft strategies that navigate some of these challenges that we have as the privacy changes.
Yeah, definitely echo all the things that Kip had mentioned, from the paid search and programmatic side of things, utilizing a lot of the first-party data that was collected and kind of translating that into some lead scoring on the CRM side. And so versus using like specific data about people, we were basically ended up translating all that into a quantifiable score for people. And so kind of targeting based off of those scores versus things like demographic indicators. Because again, like Kip mentioned, and we talked about on a prior slide too, some of those additional targeting layers that you might want to use to help get down to more intent or higher quality leads, like you just can't do in the housing space, like demographic and things like that. Also relying on a lot of the AI powered strategies that are available to us. So things like the AI powered, like Performance Max, if you're familiar with that, broad match terms, in order to expand our net without necessarily, again, applying like specific personal targeting, but just help relying on some of the machine learning to identify which leads are higher quality versus ones that aren't. And one thing that had driven a lot of the results that we see here, but it's actually a little bit less applicable now, and I'll explain why, is historically we had invested more in Bing, because up until recently, Bing was a little bit more lax in terms of some of the restrictions that we talked about. When I mentioned earlier the housing restrictions, that had specifically come from some of the language that Google provides for some of the restrictions on those categories. Bing didn't really have that for the longest time, but actually just recently, this year, we're starting to see more of the adoption of some of those restrictions within targeting capabilities within Bing. So it's still viable to invest a little bit more within Bing if you're able to just use some platforms that aren't quite caught up with that stuff. But it does seem like Microsoft is taking steps to correct in that way as well. But that is something that did help drive some of these results here. You can see I'm not going to list off every single result here, but the strategy did help us quite a bit in terms of having a successful launch of this campaign. This particular client we've been working with for about 4 years. And you can see it's not the easiest space to be in, but we've had a lot of good success with them by applying all these things we talked about today.
Awesome. Thank you, Pat. That was great. And thank you everyone for spending a few extra minutes with us today. As a thank you for joining us today, we are offering a complimentary privacy checkup. Our team will review your site's tracking technologies, consent mechanisms, and privacy notice, and you'll walk away with clear recommendations on how to reduce risk and strengthen your compliance. There'll be a link to register in the post-event email, so that'll also include a recording of today's session. But before we go and head out, I do want to thank Alex, Kip, and Pat for showing us their expertise today. And I know we've only begun to scratch the surface of what to talk about here. So a big thank you to all of you for joining us, and we appreciate your time and look forward to continuing this conversation with you. Have a great afternoon.